Example 5. For each angle, we're going to draw the angle in standard position, so they want us to draw it. Indicate which quadrant it is in. Okay. So 120. How do you draw those? Again, I like to label 80 and 90, the ones that are kind of around it. Halfway in between, you start memorizing these. Halfway in between is going to be the 135. And so 120 would be something less than that. So 120 degrees is right there. So if you want to draw it, then you should have something like that, and then a little arrow indicating how many times around have you gone. So I haven't gone around a full time, I've just done the 120. And this is in quadrant 2. Then I'm going to go on here. It says for each of the above angles, so 120 degrees, find 2 coterminals. So I was given 120 degrees, which is in quadrant 2. Then it wants us to find a coterminal angle. Did it give any restrictions? Nope. So I'm going to add 360 degrees. That will land me in the exact same spot. So 120 plus 360. So it's going to be 480 degrees. But I might as well I could add 720, but I might as well minus 360 from there. And if you don't know how to do that, you can go 360 minus 120. So go backwards. 0, 6 minus 2 is 4, 3 minus 1 is 2, so 240, but because I had just made a positive 360 instead of a negative, I changed the signs. I'm going to change the signs back now and go a negative 240 degrees. Now those are my reference angles. Sorry, not reference angles, those are my coterminal angles. I was reading down below here. It says find the reference angle. There's only ever one. So the reference angle is the gap in between. So I'll do that in a different color here. It's the gap between the terminal arm and the x-axis. Well, that gap could be here, or it could be here. And you always want to do the one that's less than 90. So that automatically eliminates this one, because this is greater than 90 degrees. So I'll have to erase that one. So my reference angle has to be here. Now some people will like to make it right there, that little gap. And it's as close as the terminal arm, but that's a terminal arm with the y-axis, and it's always the x-axis. So we're going to want to go right there. And you have to know that this is 180, and the gap between 180 and 120 is 60 degrees. So I will do that right here. Find the reference angle. Theta r is equal to 60 degrees. My reference angle is 60. So that's what we're doing for all of these. So the first one here is the second one is draw 225. So here's 180, and here's 270. Halfway in between. I memorized, by the way, all of my halfways. Obviously this one's 45, but this one right here is 135, and then 225, and then 315. In fact, if you look, and this one was 45, right? So if you look, it goes 45, 35, 25, 15. So they always drop by tens, but then they go up by the one. I tried to highlight there, but it didn't work. So the 1, then the 2, then the 3. So they're always going to be in 15s, and you're just going to have to eventually memorize them all. So halfway in between here is going to be 225, which is actually what I needed to draw. So there's 225. That is in quadrant 3. Again, if you've forgotten, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it wants us to find 2 coterminal angles. So I like to take 225, and I like to add 360, and I like to take 225, and I like to subtract 360 degrees. So 225 plus a 360, I don't know what that is, 585 maybe? And then subtract those, so 360 minus 225. So borrow from that to make it a 5, borrow to make it a 10, 10 minus 5 is 5, 5 minus 2 is 3, so negative 135 degrees. That is my coterminal. And then it wants to know my reference angle. So the reference angle is the gap between the terminal arm and the x-axis, so that little gap right there. And the difference between 225 and 180, so that little gap is 45 degrees. So theta r is 45 degrees. All right, moving on to C. So 690 degrees. So this one's weird because I know this is over 360 degrees. So I'll take 690 and I'll minus 360, just so that I know what this thing even looks like. So 0 minus 0 is 0, 9 minus 6 is 3, 3 minus 3 is also 3. So really what I need to do is just draw 330 degrees, but then make sure I do an additional loop. So I've got 270 here and 360 here. And I've drawn 330. Halfway in between would be 315. So I need a little bit more. Whoops. So halfway between was kind of hard to draw, and a little bit more. Okay, so that I'm going to label as 330. But I don't actually need to do 330, do I? I actually need to do 690. So maybe maybe I'll do is I'll write 690 degrees, but then I'll put in brackets here 330 so I don't forget. Now, in order to draw 690, you can start here, do a full loop, and then do an additional. So it should look something like that. Now that is in quadrant 4, so 4. I've drawn 690, 4. Now I can take 690, and I can add 360, and I can minus 360. So add 360 degrees, and minus 360 degrees. So 690 plus 360 is going to be 1050. And then if you subtract 690 minus 360, that will be 330. Now they're both positive. Usually I have one positive and one negative, but this one was such a high number, I got 2 positives actually, which is fine. They didn't give us any restriction, but if they wanted a negative, then one of these wouldn't cut it. I'd have to maybe minus 720. But as it stands right now, those are my reference angles. Sorry, those are my coterminal angles, and they both happen to be positive. I need to find my reference angle. So my reference angle is going to be the gap in between the terminal arm and the x-axis, which is this little gap. And if I use 690, it won't actually make sense. So that's why I left 330 here. So the gap between 330 and 60 is 30 degrees. So I'll make that theta r is equal to 30 degrees. Lastly here, I need to draw negative 300, which is actually pretty easy because that says negative 90, negative 180, negative 270, it's negative 360. Halfway in between is the 315 one, so negative 315, and so it's between 270 and 315 would be 300, so somewhere like that. That would be negative 300 between 270 and 315. So I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. So there's negative 300. I need to go in the negative direction. So that is in quadrant 1. And I've drawn negative 300 degrees. Now I need to do some coterminal. So if you have negative 300, you can just add 360 and minus 360. So I'll add 360 degrees and minus 360 degrees. So 360 is a positive 360 and a negative 300. That gap will only be 60. So that's one coterminal. And these are both negative, so my answer will be negative 300 and 360 is going to be 660. So negative 660. So those are my 2 coterminal angles. Now the reference angle is the gap in between. So this was negative 270, and this one was negative 360 or 0, but I wrote negative 360 because I have negative 300. I want to see this gap in between. So the gap in between looks like negative 60, but it can't be a negative number, so we just say the gap in between here is 60 degrees. So that's our reference angle. So we'll say theta r is 60 degrees. So in the next question, we're going to put all of this stuff together, and we're going to actually answer some questions, which is the majority of what this unit is about.